everyone. Welcome. We're coming to you live from New York City, from NYU. It's Thursday afternoon, and we're here for our periodic series, Perspectives from the Field, where we are so pleased to invite alumni from our program to come and talk about their trajectories, both that led them to our program, and then most especially their trajectory since leaving us. I'm especially happy to have Scott Grayson and Daniel Helft with us today. They both graduated from CLACS in 1987, I believe, did I get that wrong? Or maybe I got that wrong.
No, somewhere around those years. It was so long ago.
They were at CLACS in that general zone.
Exactly.
And
my daughter was young.
And we are really happy that we have the occasion to hear about their professional and personal trajectories after leaving CLACS. I have some questions prepared for Scott and Daniel to get us started. And the first one is the most general of questions, which is to have you tell us a little bit about when you were at CLACS, beyond just the year, right? Where you are now, where you are physically now, because we're scattered, right? And what you are doing now. So to kind of situate yourselves for everyone, and then I'll ask you maybe some more detailed questions about your time at CLACS and thereafter. I don't know which one of you wants to go first, if you want to volunteer.
Maybe my elder should start.
Happy to start. Thank you very much.
About a year apart.
Yeah, so anyway, thank you very much, and I'm really happy and glad to be here. Happy to see see Jan and Scott, whom we shared time in New York back in those days. And I'm in Buenos Aires now, starting the fall. It's a beautiful, beautiful day here. And to me, being at CLACS at that time was not only a very important part of what came later. It always helped me with my career and was in direct relation to what I did in my career as a journalist and then as a PR executive, working in Latin America. And now I started out 2 years ago an NGO, a foundation called Bote Agua. And so after 25 or so years of corporate world in both journalism and PR, I am leading a foundation that I founded 2 years ago called Bote Agua, and basically what we do there is have kids from very disadvantaged neighborhoods in the northern district of Tigre outside Buenos Aires, and basically we offer them to come into our shop and build a wooden boat. Tigre is a district on the water, on a delta that, waters that come all the way from Brazil and Paraguay and end up in the, port city of Buenos Aires. And when those kids come into the shop and they build this boat together, we try to teach them all kind of skills that we feel will be important for their lives, right? Discipline and, planning something and working in a team and managing to reach the objective. And they always know that whenever that boat is going to be finished, they're going to take the boat we're going to take the boat all together to the river, and we're going to row it together, and we're going to have fun, and their parents are going to be proud of them, and they're going to be proud of what they did. And in the process, we also try to teach them basics of algebra and trigonometry and understand for them the importance of, it's basically project-based learning, is for kids to relate the fact that they are learning something in school that they sometimes don't know what that's going to be good for, and suddenly this connects the dots and makes them know that learning algebra and trigonometry has a direct impact can have a direct impact in their lives, in allowing them to engage in construction, building, and things of that sort. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm also teaching journalism in a local university, and I have a few other personal projects that I carried out and so on. And that's about it. So on to you, Mr. Scott.
That's amazing stuff. We'll
Thank you.
need to chat more after this. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Scott Grayson. Yeah, we were there in and around mid '80s. They had running water then and power. It's true. And I will say, and I don't know if Danielle recalls this or if this was his experience, and he studied in the United States college, but most people I spoke to back then, when I said I was accepted at NYU Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies, would look at me like, "What's that? What's Latin America?" So we've come a long way where so many universities and educational institutions, that's mainstay. You have Latin American studies as a program, as a department. So we were kind of novel back then. And right now, you know, and I'll speak about where we were, you know, in our history. But when Omar and I met, I said, I'm the wrong person to have on this panel because I didn't exactly end up using Latin American stuff. I went there, I studied, you know, international policy, but specializing in Latin American and Caribbean studies, and hoping to work as a policy analyst. And we could speak more about that afterwards. And this was in the Reagan era, and I moved to Washington to work at a government agency. I was hired as a Latin American analyst, and right when I moved there, they said, "Oh, sorry, you're hired. Your clearances have passed, but we can't bring you on yet. We have a hiring freeze. US Congress passed a bill." And so my career had lots of meandering. Right now, where I am now, I'm the CEO of the American Public Works Association in Canada and United States, and we're expanding internationally. We provide education for people who work in public works, so that's building roads and bridges and snow and ice removal, emergency management. And we also lobby in Washington and Ottawa on issues of infrastructure, emergency management, and a whole host of other related issues. So with that, I'll let you ask us more questions and we can get back to what our experiences were like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's so interesting to hear your different trajectories. And Scott, it's not uncommon for people to come out with a degree in Latin American and Caribbean studies and find that they're using skills from the MA, even if they don't land specifically in relation to Latin America, or they start in Latin America and it takes them or they start, you know, in relation to Latin America and it takes them to other places as their career unfolds. So I think in a sense, you both represent two very common type trajectories in terms of what you've done with the degree, the immediate relevance of the degree, although completely singular in terms of your accomplishments. And we want to hear more about those. So maybe I could just throw out a general question to ask you if you could share any kind of memorable experience from your time at CLACS, whether that's in the classroom, a professor, things that happen outside the classroom, you know, just what your time was like. Give us a picture of CLACS circa mid 80s.
You want to speak about when we met in the
Sure.
couch in the lobby?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, we were all new, young, scared students. I was scared, coming out of graduate program, NYU, and we're in this room, and there were probably about 6 other new students, and Danielle was there, and it was really quiet. And then both of us started speaking, and that's how we met. And then everybody else started speaking as well. But Go ahead. What are your memories?
Well, my memories were very much tied to, I must say, tied to, to knowing you as my first and inseparable friend back then, because I mean, that was my first time living in New York, and Scott was a New Yorker. So being at NYU was as much to me, being in at CLACS and studying and learning and discussing politics and all that stuff. It was as much that as getting to discover New York in the 80s, and much of that happened with Scott leading the way, because as a New Yorker, and that wasn't just having fun. That was really significant to me. How much I was fond of that city, and how much I discovered the city after class, going to Chinatown for dinner or Indian food or whatever it was, and all the culture scene coming from Buenos Aires, which is it's an interesting city culturally. There's lots going on, and New York seemed to be like a Buenos Aires reloaded, so like more of it, even more of it. But in many ways, I was prepared to tackle a place like New York, and it was so interesting to me, and I fell in love with New York. And then I stayed a couple of years, and I started my career actually in New York, which I can discuss. Let you know about. But so that was really great. The location, NYU, spending all those days in the library, and then you were out of the library and you were in the thick of it, and that was fantastic. And
I'll pick up on that if I could. When we met, Danielle was kind of my entry into real life Latin America, right? I had read a lot as an undergrad about the history, about the policies, about US relations, which is really what got me started. I was so annoyed as an undergraduate about US policy with Latin and Central America that I started reading more, and said, this can't be, it's not possible. We didn't have internet then, right? So you couldn't read as much as you can read now. So what little you read maybe was assigned in school. And if you had really good professors, they'd show you things that maybe the rest of the United States would rather not have you learn about. So Danielle was a real life Latin American and could share his experiences, which made it real. I grew up in New York City. I moved around a lot, but my high school was in Lower Manhattan. I was at Stuyvesant High School, where the old building was. So I spent most of my high school years in the NYU area, but it was still a very different experience being there now as a grad student.
I'm curious, you both mentioned how important New York was to your experience. One of the things that we talk about a lot with incoming students, especially those who are coming from outside of the city, is the fact that New York, certainly now, is a deeply Latin American and Caribbean city, right? In terms of its makeup. Was that part of your experience of New York in the 80s, or would you say less so?
Well, I haven't lived in New York now for a long time, but back in those days, I mean, I remember staying over in the summer, the New York summer, and working in bars, and basically the only language we spoke, in bars was Spanish. I remember everybody in the kitchen, and actually the owners of the place I worked for were from Ecuador, and there was a lot of Latin Americans around New York, and to me that was very exciting because it was a different type of Latin America, usually not Argentines, but from other nationalities, and that also helped my education a lot. It's not only understanding how the U.S. thinks and thinks of Latin America and the history of the U.S.-Latin America relations, but also meeting both North Americans and Latin Americans in New York. It's a very, very interesting cultural experience. It certainly was for me, and it had a direct impact in my career. I mean, no doubt. Once I was back, home, I worked in newsrooms, and people recognized that kind of knowledge or experience that I had, and it was always very useful. It was very useful to me when I did a lot of traveling through Latin America as a result of my work and so on. And I can say that it mostly all started back in those days in New York. So
I remember you said, Scott, I can't understand some of the slang and the accent. I'm like, you're fluent. This is your first language. But growing up in the 60s on in New York, it was always a either Dominican or Puerto Rican.
Right.
Grew up with people from both of those countries. Either they had moved over here or were born here, and that was part of my love of the culture, the language. And I started studying Spanish in junior high. I was never great at Spanish, but I could understand it well. And then I had a great compliment. I was in Chile and I was staying with a family, and they started laughing at me when I was speaking Spanish. And at that point, I was pretty fluent, was able to speak. But I was very self-conscious. And I said, oh, am I speaking like a gringo? And they laughed at me. They said, no, you have an Argentine accent. And that was all Danielle's fault.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. That's
yeah,
wonderful.
and Scott stayed at my parents' place back in those days. He was
Right.
in-
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that it's very special for us to bring you both back at the same time and see, the connections and the friendships that you formed in graduate school. And I think
Yeah, indeed.
that's
Definitely.
something that
You know, and Jill, you were saying about maybe the experience outside the classroom. We already both maybe mentioned, but also it was. I mean, we have other friends who were classmates, and I see Jan there, of course, who came to Buenos Aires, and then we spent a lot of time discussing our classes and discussing our books and talking, from different perspectives what we thought about this and that. And a few of our friends went on to have PhDs in history, and they were very interesting characters with very interesting thoughts, and all that was part of the education, no doubt. And then I got my first job in New York City thanks to a recommendation from one of the professors at NYU.
wonderful. And
Yeah.
What was your first position?
My first position was as an assistant something at the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith in across the street from the UN, and I was in the Latin American department at the ADL. My boss was a rabbi, and that was really good because rabbis can write very well, and that helped me out. Well, I then became a full-time journalist, writing mostly, both in English and in Spanish. And I remember that some of the skills I picked up at ADL were really interesting. And we were putting out a publication there that was called the Latin American Quarterly, and it was, and it allowed me to. It was a stepping job and allowed me to live in New York for a while, working, and it was very interesting. And then I went back to Buenos Aires and I got a job with Reuters as a reporter, and that's how my journalistic career started out.
I'll pick up on that and tell Danielle's story if you don't mind. So I remember, and then mine too. I think the president of Argentina was being sworn in, Raul Alfonsín. Danielle was in New York City, or he was at the UN, and the local news media back in Buenos Aires didn't have anybody up in New York, and they found him. And didn't you do a news interview on camera?
Yeah. I started working for local media while I was in New York, freelancing and so on. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So, while I was at NYU, one of the NYU professors who's not there anymore was the publisher of NACLA, and asked me to work with him as an editor, and that was an incredible experience because it was true policy about Latin America. The part I didn't speak about how can you use this MA. So even though I wasn't ultimately hired by the government agency, I looked around, and one of my first jobs, I was hired as a paralegal at a law office. I spoke Spanish then and had the background, and their client was Peru. And this was mid 80s, and I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the Hunt brothers, very wealthy people. They had cornered the silver market and manipulated the futures market. So I worked on that case for a year, and so I was able to use my Latin American education studies.
Well, that's so interesting. That's a really interesting use. I don't know, just a little note on NACLA. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, Scott, but I was going to actually ask you if you, given your interest in US policy related to Latin America, whether you were a NACLA reader, and it turns out that you worked with NACLA, but in the fullness of time, NACLA and CLACS developed a relationship, and NACLA is actually housed out of CLACS right now, has its office right down the hall.
Wow.
Where I'm sitting. So
that's great.
And the students who we have, as you know, I don't recall, Daniel, whether we had our joint program with journalism when you were here
No.
at that time, but we now have a joint program in journalism.
That sounds great, Jill, because I think it's, it really dovetails very nicely, the Latin American
Like,
political and economical education for a journalist. It's really significant. It's really valuable.
absolutely. So some of the folks who are on our call are either already in that program or are contemplating joining.
That's
that
great.
program.
Good for them. Yeah. To me, as I say, for my journalism career, it was a really good path. The education I took at CLACS was really good.
Speaking of writing, when someone asks me now, well, you don't work in Latin American studies, I say really all of the skills I'm most proud of now, I learned there, and I'm not just making that statement. So why? I had a professor there who had us read a large book every week and write a 12-page book review. Were you in there with me, Jen?
I suppose I was.
It was really hard, but the best class I ever had. And so he asked us, read this book. You're now almost experts, and write it as though you're writing a New York Times book review. And I said, but I'm only a grad student. What would I possibly know? He said, don't worry. And it allowed me to learn analytic skills, to really probe, analyze, and feel like, yeah, maybe I am almost an expert. Just because someone else has published and I'm not, does not necessarily mean I don't know either as much or I can't analyze. And then he really marked up my writing. And in my head, I was a great writer, but he just slashed it in a really positive way. And so I really learned how to write well and be analytic. So great skills from that perspective.
Yeah, I will add that I remember, I had a class in the evening. Usually it was in the evening, and so I would go to the library after lunch. And between after lunch and my evening class, I maybe would go through 3 books, or maybe 4 books. And never before I thought I could go through so many books in so little time.
Right.
And those are skills that I felt I developed at CLACS that really were the kind of skills that as a journalist you use on a daily basis, because you are thrown a story, you got to go pursue something, chase a story, and you know maybe very little about it, and in a very short amount of time you not need to understand what's going on and read stuff really fast and just cross the page, and those kind of skills I were definitely. I picked them up in a way in my days in grad school. So that was
Great point. I had a summer course. It was international policy with, I still recall his name, Professor Maus. He's from Israel, wrote everything. Nice person, but I thought very unrealistic. He put 15 weeks in, maybe it was like 6 weeks, if that. We had to write 15 10-page papers. And I think I remember we had to read like 20,000 pages within those weeks. It was unreal. But to Danielle's point, you can't read every word. And in college and undergraduate, I felt like I had to read every word and all that stuff. There's just so much coming at you that you need to learn the strategy of learning what you need to know. Now, my problem as a student always was that I like learning everything, and you don't always get good grades when you want to learn everything because you're not answering always what the professor wants you to. And so I ended up working a lot harder because I got good grades because I figured out what people want of you and how to respond in an essay. But then I wanted to learn more. So, it's your choice.
Absolutely. No, and I think that's an experience that it's a perennial experience for students, especially starting the MA program. That first semester is a little bit like boot camp of figuring out graduate school and figuring out the discipline of doing that quantity of reading and writing.
Exactly.
And I think we've kept the bar equally high, maybe not quite as high as your
Nobody was like Professor Mouse.
Now, did you guys, when you were at CLACS at that time, did you focus on did you write a master's thesis or a major project as part of your degree?
Yeah, we certainly did. I remember that I finished the coursework and went back home for a while, and together with a friend of mine who was an economist, we got a job, not a job, an assignment by the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, to write a piece on the importance of few crops in the northeast of Argentina, and so I had to dig into that quite deeply. And of course that was work, but since I hadn't done yet my thesis project, I thought that I might turn that into a story, into development and so on, and I pitched that to my advisor, and it worked out, and that's basically what I did. I wrote about economic development.
Excellent. How interesting. What about you, Scott? Did you have a project?
Yeah, so I don't generally share this publicly, but it's 31 years ago. So I had no clue what I would write on. And that's part of the fun. It's like, okay, what do you want to spend a lot of time and energy researching? And my first step was my father had a friend who was the staff director for the Senate Western Hemisphere Committee. So highest role that deals with Latin America. And I went to her house and I met with her, and I said, and she was a Latin Americanist when there weren't a lot out there then. And I said, I don't know. She said, well, your father might not be happy with me, but there's a guy we're watching named Noriega in Panama. And you could do some economic work for your master's thesis and spend some time in Panama. This would have been 86. And so I said, and I thought about it. It was like, okay, I mean, basically they maybe were asking me to be a spy. I don't know. I didn't go that route. And we studied a lot at the start of the program, foreign policy decision-making models, a lot. And I don't know if it's studied as much anymore. When Danielle and I were in school, it was all about Cold War. And then alliances, it's either this side or this. Now it's not that way anymore. So there were a handful of foreign policy decision-making models. And I thought, well, let's see if those really work. And then I applied U.S. relations to Nicaragua at that point. And then I kind of plugged them in there. I was writing a chapter at that point. It was in the Reagan era. And his main Latin American person was a man named Elliot Abrams. I don't know if you've heard of him. And I was not a huge fan of his foreign policy choices at that point. And I was holed up in my room writing the chapter, 8 hours. And then my now wife and I went out and saw a movie. I was then in Washington and we're there. I just want to unwind and relax. Who's sitting in front of me? Like directly in front is Elliot Abrams.
No.
Wanted to hit him on the head.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, what amazing research projects you've conducted. I think research remains a really important part of the program here. So the students who are on the call, who are current students, are in the thick of figuring out. They've decided what they're writing out about and about to really delve into that as they enter their final semester next year. So it's interesting to hear the choices you made and really especially interesting to hear how tied your interests were to contemporary politics in that moment, because I think it remains true for CLACS students today. They're having different conversations about neoliberalism and the contemporary landscape, right? But I think coming from a very similar place.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Danielle, wouldn't you say the program was kind of very left-leaning? We learned a lot about socialism and Marxism, and most of the group.
I remember there was lots about dependency theory and
yes.
Of U.S. Latin American relations. But I remember at the same time that in some of our classes we had people from the military who were taking the degree, and they would sort of confront very strongly with a professor on ideological terms, and that was very interesting. And,
to that point, we were speaking about our experience in New York. So most of our courses were at night, and about 8 or 9 of us went out almost every night and ate Indian food over on 8th Street. And it was you were allowed to bring your own beer and wine, and the dinner was like $5.50 for the most food you could possibly eat. And this one West Point graduate was always with us. And I remember one night, and the rest were kind of Marxist leaning, he started speaking about how we could easily invade Nicaragua. And well, we'd only lose X amount of lives, but if we arrived by sea, it would be this. But that was the beauty of the program, because it got some of us out of our comfort zone, hearing other ideologies.
Right, absolutely. And I think I would say there's, not an official political position for the program today any more than I imagine there was officially then. But one thing I can say that I think has been consistent for many years at CLACS is a real interest in sort of applied research. So a notion that what you learn in the classroom should have some real world relevance, and that people take what they learn out. A lot of people really interested in activism or working with NGOs or other kinds of community-based work. We see a lot of that still at CLACS.
I think the program sets you up very nicely for those kind of careers, no doubt.
Absolutely. I noticed that we noticed you earlier, Jan, that you're on the call. I wonder if you want to say hi and say any words about your time at CLACS. I'm putting a little spotlight on you. You weren't enlisted to do this.
I'm sure he'll be able to handle it.
We're so happy to see you.
Well, I was, Omar and I have kept up contact for quite a while, and Debbie Truhan, who is the co-director, and I are some close friends.
Oh,
She's in
wonderful.
retirement in Pennsylvania. I have lifelong connections from there. And I was always, for various reasons, interested in the arts. I was intensely studying the visual arts as a teenager. And then I graduated to dance. And so I went to City College because it was the only program I could find with a double major in dance and Latin American studies. And then somehow CLACS found me and found a jazz musician and DJ from City College and Neva Bortel, and recruited us for CLACS. So whereas a lot of people had said, you're nuts, you're going to be a terrible dancer if you keep distracting yourself with Latin American studies, and you're going to be a terrible Latin Americanist if you keep distracting yourself with dance. And CLACS said, welcome. We know exactly how to serve you or help you or support you, but anything we think of will run your way, and anything you think of we will support. So it turned out to be a really beautiful experience. And when I was finishing, and Debbie and Chris Mitchell said, okay, what are you going to do your thesis on? And I said, no, you brought me in as an oddball. I'm going to go out as an oddball. I'm going to produce a concert, contemporary dance of the Americas. So we called it Que Onda, Que Dizem, What's the Story? New Dance of the Americas.
That's amazing.
And we got the public theater involved and dance theater workshop, and we held it at the 14th Street Y. And NYU CLACS got the public relations department involved and got the print department involved. So CLACS got all of my posters and postcards designed and printed and distributed.
And do you still have any of that material?
I do. So
I'd love some copies of it. We may have some in our archives, but our archives are thin when we get to some of the earlier period. I would love to have some record of that. It's a beautiful story.
Oh, it was such a great experience. They said, how will we judge it if it's not a piece of paper? And I said, you'll come to the performance. So CLACS became a ticket office and sold out the weekend. And it was, I remember it was Super Bowl weekend. They said, you're going to crash and burn, but we sold out Super Bowl weekend, 3 dance concerts. The artists got picked up. We had Argentine artists, Brazilian artists, Cuban artists, Puerto Rican artists, Nicaraguan artists. They got picked up by a big producer and toured the world for a couple of years. It was
what an accomplishment.
Beautiful. And my second Fulbright, my first Fulbright was organizing the Year of Dance in El Salvador during the Civil War. And my second one was divided between Montevideo and Buenos Aires and Rosario, teaching arts management. So that's when I visited Daniel, and we went out in his boat to El Tigre. That
boat, don't imagine myself in a very large boat.
Your yacht?
Oh yeah, just a little
yacht. So, and I remember he was with tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but he was with a financial newsletter in San Francisco. We were having such a beautiful time and a million things to talk about. And he says, just a second, I have to call my editor in San Francisco with an excuse for why I'm not on a conference call, because we're having such a good time on the picnic in El Tigre. So
that's brilliant.
A very precious memory. So
I'm so delighted to hear that story. And you know, it's really nice to hear that about CLACS in the 80s. I've talked to Chris about the program, Chris Mitchell, but we never didn't coincide at NYU. If we did, it was a very short period before his retirement. But so I have some sense of CLACS under his wonderful directorship. But one thing that is still true of CLACS, and I'm so happy to hear that it was true then, is just how interdisciplinary its perspectives were, how open it is to a range of different approaches to Latin American and Caribbean studies, which includes the arts. And one of the other things that we now have, which we may not have had in the 80s, is we have a joint degree in museum studies. So some of the folks on maybe that existed back then. I'm not sure when that came in.
Remember.
but
No,
it means that
but we had, I guess, electives, and one of them that I believe I needed to have was art history.
Yeah.
And that I would never have chosen. I love art, but I was there to do policy, economics, and history. Why should
Right.
I waste my money on art? And it was an incredible experience. And the professor American was a Mexican muralist, and she would have art showings at her loft down on Houston Street.
Oh,
And
brilliant.
I would show up and all these artists. So yeah, great experiences there
Oh
too
my
in the
gosh,
arts.
what wonderful memories, and how terrific to flesh out this picture of what CLACS was like at that time. I just want to say again what a wonderful thing it is to witness your long-term relationships and friendships. It is something we talk a lot at CLACS. We just had an admissions event the other day, and one of the things that I repeat over and over again to prospective students is how important the cohort is, right? The students that you're going to sit around that table with day in and day out, having those conversations. You will learn as much from them as you will from anything else in the program. And I'm constantly encouraging them to look around at each other to realize that this is, the biggest and brightest asset that the program has, right?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
I would second that for sure. Sorry, Scott.
No.
Yeah, I would no, go ahead.
No,
You want to go
no.
ahead? No, I just wanted to second that because that's so true. The combination of studying and reading and the friendships and the exchange that you have with friends, and the fact of being in New York City as well, with so many things going on, either it's in arts or policy or history, whatever you want, you're gonna find it in the city. Makes for a very powerful combination. And one thing that made me think, Jill was saying something. I mean, I worked for Google, and when I was at Google in Buenos Aires, and even as a reporter, I mean, I would look at the backgrounds of many of the professionals working there, and they came from all over. It wasn't just computer scientists like you would imagine. Not at all. It was anthropologists and political scientists and economists and what have you, art history people, all kinds. I mean, I think now much more than back in the 80s and early 90s, the kind of skills that you need for very, very important work that is being done comes from all sides. It's no longer just 3 or 4 important fields, like it could be computer science or medicine or this or that. Everything kind of is useful and helps out and becomes part of your job. And in that sense, sometimes you can't, I mean, when we were students, maybe we couldn't imagine exactly how it would all come together. But the truth is that it ends up coming together and being very helpful, and everything works out in some way or another, and everything is useful. So, that's something that in my career was certainly that way. And as I say, I've seen more and more that you need people with very open experiences to join these kind of very large international outfits.
And that's well stated. I mean, I have a staff of about 58 people and have hired people over the years. And most of my career, I've worked for nonprofits. I've worked for trade groups that support technical people. So engineers, software, hardware, and I'm so proud of my liberal arts education, because to Danielle's point, it really gives you a lot of skills. I see that, and I'm not disparaging technical education, but it kind of historically had pigeonholed you. Liberal arts gives you a whole host of skills, as we've all spoken about: analytic skills, writing skills, learning how to read. So
good, Scott. I agree with that.
There's a nice note from Lucio Cali in the chat that you may have seen. Rocio is a student who's been admitted to our program, who we're very much hoping to welcome in the fall. Who, as you can see in the chat, tells us that she's attending this event from El Tigre.
From where?
From El Delta del Tigre. She's
Really?
She was from Argentina. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's where I spend most of my downtime.
It's great. It was great to hear your story about El Bote del Agua.
Bote del Agua.
Absolutely. Oh, Rocio.
Glad to hear. Amazing, this image of Rocio in the Delta and in El Tigre. That's where I spend my downtime. That's where I was with Jan many years ago.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that, Rocio. Thank you. It's wonderful. This is, I have to say, we in the past have done some events like these at CLACS, where we would invite you to New York and come meet our students, and I would love it if we were all sitting in the seminar room here face to face and sharing some food, and that would be wonderful. But I can also see some advantages to assembling everyone from across the globe, right, to be able to participate. It's really beautiful.
It's really amazing. It's just coincidence that Rocio is in that particular place of the world. Actually, my two grown-up daughters live in Tigre in the Delta now.
Wow.
Yeah.
How amazing. How terrific.
Yes.
And again, I know sometimes it's hard for people to think of questions. They're hearing your story, but it can be hard to come up with specific questions for you. Oh, Angeli,
question.
There's one.
Hi, my name's Angeli. I'm actually in their international relations program here at NYU, and I have a concentration in Latin America. And I'm currently in my last semester, so I'm applying to jobs and kind of trying to figure out which direction I want to take. And I think since you both kind of started in the place where I am right now, I'm just wondering if you have any advice for those first 5 years, post grad school, and you're figuring out which direction you want to go. I know for so many people, it goes so many different ways. So I'm wondering, how do you pick?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my email so that you can reach out and we're able to have a more extensive discussion. It's challenging just because there are so many options out there, and how does one focus? One focuses starting with passion. What are you most passionate about? I mean, what we know is that people really exceed and excel in jobs that they're most passionate about. In reality, one does not always end up, your first one out of school in the best one ever, and then you keep experimenting and learning. But there's a whole host, as you well know, the international agencies in Washington and New York. There's Capitol Hill. There's a wide range of that. And what I tell my own kids, networking. They, I'll often offer, would you like me to put you in touch with person X? And the response is, I can handle it on my own. Networking is so important. I don't know if Jan and Danielle agree or not, but it's having discussions with as many people as you can. They may not have an opening at that point, but they may know someone else who has one, or they meet you, they say, you're great, I don't have an opening now, but as soon as I have one, I'll bring you on board. But anyway, I'm happy to speak a lot more extensively.
Yeah, I would say that, there's so many different ways that I'm just going to say what was the case for me. I expressed interest in finding a job in New York because I liked the city so much. I wanted to stay for a while. And I remember my professor, Marty Weinstein, who got me this interview at the Anti-Defamation League. And to me, the Anti-Defamation League was a place that I felt would be good for my career. I mean, I was interested in the job for sure, but knowing that I was at a place that was a recognizable institution and a recognizable organization, I knew that would help me as a stepping job in, you know, in getting maybe to a more specific destination that I wanted, but think, you know, kind of understanding that at that stage, very early stage of my career, having a job with a recognizable organization that was well regarded would be good, and it actually was. You know, it was very important to me because my first job as a journalist was with this a fantastic company called Reuters. Now it's Reuters Thomson, and back in those days, Reuters was pretty much the wire service worldwide. There was almost no Bloomberg around back in those days, and there was AP and UPI, but Reuters was really the most important outfit for wire service. And you know, and I didn't have that much to show for at that point, but the fact that I had one good job, you know, under my belt, and I had a few languages, and I had an experience working in, you know, living in New York and working in New York, and graduate degree and all that helped me land that job. And the truth is that then I moved on to many different jobs. Once you already you become an established journalist with a, you know, or a journalist with an established news organization, you know, your career really can take off very smoothly. But I also had friends at Reuters that are still at Reuters 30 years down the road, and that had, you know, spent their entire career with that company, and they're very happy that they did, and they went places, and they went to Europe and the United States, and they were bureau chiefs in different parts of the world. So to me, that was the path, you know, and I'm grateful to that first job at as I say, a prestigious place, because I think that starts you out and makes it easier for you to find, you know, maybe the good job that you want sometime down the road.
Right, absolutely wonderful advice.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. Good luck.
Definitely, and of course, lots of good luck. We do find that our graduates, and I think I would include the international relations graduates in the scheme of what I know, you know, the job market is always a tough thing to face, but people do land in some very interesting places. We are always gratified every year to find that people after, you know, a few months or whatnot of getting their name out there.
I would also add, if I could,
yeah,
that I've been not surprised, but NYU has a really good reputation. I was at the University of Wisconsin undergrad. A lot of my friends ended up in the Ivy Leagues. When you're at Stuyvesant High School in New York, you've got to end up in the Ivies. And I said, you know, if I've got 4 years, I can experience the rest of the United States. I'm going to head out in the Midwest. And you know, when I've looked for work, having Wisconsin and NYU on my resume has been great. I mean, like, oh wow. So, you know, it's not an Ivy League school, but it has a great rep.
Yeah. Well, our upper leadership loves to think of itself as very comparable to, but it's also true that NYU has gone through, since the time you were here, NYU has gone through dramatic changes and dramatic growth, and I think has an even wider and deeper reputation than it had before. And of course, CLACS now has, you know, over 50 years under its belt of doing what we do.
Well, everybody's a lot smarter than we were, right?
It always seems that way, doesn't it?
It does. I would not get into NYU anymore.
Oh, I don't know. I think you would do very well. That's to the contrary. I think it's really interesting to hear, because programs change over time, especially with leadership and changing professors and
True.
You know, everything. It's a university is a living organism, right? Made up of the people who comprise it. But it's so interesting in your stories to hear about really some of the continuities from your time to ours, right? And the kinds of work that you were doing, your studies, the dynamics that you had in relation to the city and to each other. It's really interesting and gratifying to really feel like there are a lot of people who have come in your footsteps and had similar trajectories.
Yeah, Jill, for me, I mean, it's really a very nice opportunity to be on this call. Frankly, I feel great. It's not only seeing again my good old friends, but it's connecting to a part of our past and something that was meaningful in our lives and history. So
Absolutely.
Definitely true.
And it's especially wonderful we don't always get the opportunity to catch up with graduates from that period, and it's really wonderful to see the ways in which a master's degree has not only informed your next steps right out of school into a job or the next job as you've described, but in some ways that all of those more intangible skills that you learned in graduate school and those relationships that you built in graduate school continue to be so relevant for you.
Well, I recall my father when I applied and I heard I was in, and I was excited, said, "How are you going to use a master's in Latin American studies?" I remind him of that now.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad,
It's
because
like, I don't know.
we have so many answers to that question.
I wish you were there then. I paid for my own school though. He said, "I'm not paying for it."
Yeah.
And it was worth it.
That too, by all means. Well, I'm looking at the time, and I had promised only to keep you for an hour, and our hour has gone very, very quickly. I don't know if there are any last minute questions or comments from our group.
I'm not in a hurry, so whatever you want.
So if anyone is interested in posing a question. And I don't know if any of you, including you, Jan, have any kind of final thoughts for us. We're eager to hear them.
Well, just a quick question, just something Danielle said about the past. It's nice to reconnect with the past, but it's interesting. I'm living in rural Western Mexico now in the state of Michoacan. When COVID hit, I was in a big project with some historic homes in Mexico City. And the indigenous Purépecha people invited me. They said, "Well, this is where we love you, and you love us, and this is where we need you. You are not needed so much working with wealthy people in Mexico City. You're really needed here." So I'm working with the Grupo Folclórico Purépecha, which is about 100 young people, and we're creating alternatives to forced migration to the United States. And there are drug problems, and transporting drugs offers an income. So when I come and when I invite people from other places to come and visit, the Purépecha people say, "Wow, our dances have value, our costumes have value, our food has value, our traditions have value." And what is fundraising? Because I'm a gestor cultural, I'm an arts manager. So what is fundraising? I've formed a not-for-profit here, Puentes y Redes Sociedad Civil, and I'm working with the Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes and with the Secretaría de Cultura de Morelia and Secretaría de Cultura of Mexico City. And it's just, and we're building something that actually comes out of the Spanish Agency for Economic Cooperation, which is called a horizontal democracy through the arts. And it's completely inclusive of senior artists and LGBTQ artists and women artists who are still underrepresented in museums. And so I think I like Scott, I won't say exactly how old I am, but I find I'm feeling just as fresh and just as excited about building new connections and building on old connections. Danielle's mother has an astounding arts collection in Buenos Aires, so inspiring just to find that ability to bring different fields together, which I felt CLACS nourished. And in answer to Angeli's question, I show up at Latin American Studies Association. I don't know who I'm going to meet, but I assume I'm going to meet somebody very interesting and honest and hardworking and visionary and forward-looking. So, and they say people never remember you for the things you didn't say. So it's just good to speak up sometimes too. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan. And I would say something about my personal experience is that for 25 years or so, I worked for extremely big, large international corporations such as Reuters and Bloomberg and Google and Facebook. And now I go every morning to a little shop in a very impoverished part of Tigre, which is a northern suburb of Buenos Aires, and I have a team of 5, 20-year-olders who work with me, and we bring in kids from very disadvantaged backgrounds, and we're on a totally shoestring budget. And I enjoy that as much, and I feel as proud and as happy doing that than when I was at Google and people would say, you would go into a cocktail party or whatever, and people are like, oh, you work for Google, that's so interesting, and this and that, and it's so special in this company. And really, to me, I could say that I feel maybe even prouder and happier that now that I'm older and I don't need to work so hard and just look, and taking into consideration so much the financial part of my life, and I can do things that I'm more passionate about. Having gone to this kind of NGO work makes me feel as fulfilled and happy as as when I was working for all those brand names and so on. And to me, I thought it was important to share that.
Absolutely.
Would you say this program creates happy people? I think
Certainly,
Jan, Danielle, and I are happy people. You can add that on your brochure, Jill.
Exactly.
You can add that on your brochure. This program creates happy people.
That's wonderful. It's wonderful to put it that way. And to be honest with you, that's actually the point, right? I mean, we train people to have certain kinds of skills and a certain base of knowledge about the region. We're really cultivating a certain orientation to the region that is compassionate and caring, right? But at the end of the day, we're hoping to be at one building block, one step in the process of building a happy life. And I think your 3 stories are really tremendous that way. And so, to me, so interesting to see that you've ended up doing such different things, but so deeply and passionately, and each of you committed so fully to not just your field, but to fields that really are making the world a better place, right?
Let's hope so.
Yeah, Liza.
Yeah.
Liza, do you want to say something?
I don't have a question. I might have one later, but I haven't come up with an actual question right now. But I wanted to say just to thank you guys, and I think that the diversity of your experiences, each of you, and then like each of you individually, and then all 3 of you collectively, is both really exciting and also like is also intimidating. Like, oh, there's so many options. That's great, and also scary at the same time. But actually, is very great. And I think hearing each of your paths and how you've done different things, at different points and sort of changed, that takes it from being scary to being like exciting, because it's not, you can go in different directions and continue to build on the skills that we're all building. But I wanted to basically repeat what Jill said earlier, that it's really cool to hear sort of your memories of the program, and then also with each other, because I think that's something that I very much that's one of the main criteria of how I picked where I wanted to go to grad school, was about sort of the community. And I think CLACS does a really beautiful job of cultivating community. And so I really appreciated, especially hearing that has been a long-standing thing, and that it like continues to last in your lives. So yeah, and thanks for joining us.
That's fabulous.
Yes.
What's important is that, when you have a liberal arts education, as I was speaking about earlier, your career probably won't be in a straight line, and that's great. it just opens the world up. You're right. It's scary. When I graduated, I had my master's there. I was working as a waiter and a word processor, and I'm like, okay, right. But then after that, I had all these skills that I could plug in almost anywhere. And so I went and I moved around a lot. I mean, some I loved, others I didn't love, and I left. But every place I was, I kept building on my skills. And when you're in it at the moment, you never quite know what skills you're learning. It just, when you leave and you look back and say, oh, when I was a waiter, I learned how to manage a lot of people and stress and and I improved my Spanish as a waiter too, because everybody who worked there, yeah, but that's a whole nother story. We could all talk for hours. We're shy, as you noticed, right?
No, but that's so true. You know, this not being a technical thing, maybe it's more difficult to understand what is this class gonna be, you know, useful for, but it ends up all working out. I mean, that's the interesting part.
Yeah.
I mean, it certainly was for me and for you guys, I guess. So.
Wonderful, and thank you, Liza, for that comment. Liza is in her first year, along with a few others on the call, and they've had the special. They are of a special generation that started in the middle of COVID. So we're trying hard to keep up building community.
Are you all online still, or is it hybrid?
Yeah, mostly. We have a little bit of some presential activities, but mostly online. And hopefully by the fall we'll.
You know, Jill, my daughter is in school and she's doing anthropology in Buenos Aires, and she's living in Tigre, which is a very remote place, and she's doing everything from, you know, online, of course. And once I, you know, enter the house, it's their house there, and she was in bed, and she still hadn't gone out of bed, and she told me, I already had my first class today. And I guess that's how it is these days.
Well, that may actually be why some people aren't on video with us today. They may still be in bed.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is okay. That's one of the things that COVID has made okay.
Yeah, well, I'm a you know, college professor myself, and when my students don't open up the camera, I just assume that they are still in bed. You know?
I have that with my staff. We'll have every other week staff meetings, and there are 61 squares. And I said, okay, I know you're still in bed in pajamas, but can you at least flip on your camera from your waist up so we know you're present?
Right, exactly.
That's what I keep telling my students, but they just don't comply. It's just like turn on the camera, and maybe one camera turns on.
Well, I pay their salaries, so they
Okay, maybe that's what it is.
Turn on the
Different
camera.
relationship. Yeah,
exactly. That's what it is.
Well, it's nice to see. I see that Marchita, who's also in her first year, has turned on her camera, and Marchita is coming to us from sunny Puerto Rico. So we have.
I see palm trees.
We're jealous. We're very jealous.
Very nice.
We want to.
Well, thank you so much, everybody.
All right.
I put my email in there if anyone would want to speak about next steps, policy. I work out of an office both in Kansas City and Washington, D.C. We have an advocacy office there, so be happy to speak about what's happening in D.C. and the Hill.
Thank you so much. Thank you, really, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for being here, and we may call on you again. Hope that you don't mind. It's
certainly not. It's been a lot of fun.
It's been such a pleasure to get to know you and hear about your experiences with CLACS. And thank you for being so generous with your time and your experience with our students.